Frank Yosa here, CEO of KetoneAid. So this is going to be the protocol video. Hopefully it's not too long, and I can give you some timestamps so you can jump to other segments. So this is how you take the ketone ester. It's very difficult. People think that you can just drink the drink and go on your run and have, performance best, and it won't happen. One trainer just gave me a great analogy. He said it's kind of like a recipe for making a cake. If you decide to just, it has to be very exact. If you decide to swap out the, baking, uh, the flour for baking soda, and then you come back saying that the cake tasted nasty, you know, don't blame me if you haven't followed the exact recipe. So first we're going to start off with non-ketogenic athletes. If you don't know what ketogenic is, then you are a non-ketogenic athlete. We will then go into partially ketogenic athletes and people that are fully fat adapted ketogenic, and hopefully I'll put a timestamp here so you can jump straight to that. So a glucose-based athlete, what happens with the ketone ester is that it will lower your blood glucose. So if you just take the drink, all it is doing is swapping one fuel for another. So it's taking your glucose system, dropping it down substantially, 20, 30, 40%, and replacing it with ketones. And no matter what you might have heard online about ketones are stronger than glucose and stuff like that, we haven't seen any gains. If anything, performance decreases. So we've tested it, multiple times, either weightlifting or running. Um, doesn't work because you're hypoglycemic and you can't have a good workout. So you need to have what's called the dual fuel, which blows a lot of people's minds. And they're like, why haven't I read about this? Why haven't I seen this with, the ketone salts? The ketone salts can't deliver enough BHB to lower your blood glucose to be a problem. And you can't deliver enough BHB, the ketone, in order to, have the dual system in place. So what you need to do, and this is all written out on the protocol website, is you need to start with a regular dinner, whatever you would normally do, and then in the morning you will skip breakfast or have a very, very small breakfast. If you have a small breakfast, make sure you're having 3 to 4 hour window. You really want to take this protocol on an empty stomach. We found it's much, much better. And we found when someone took a bowl of cereal and put honey on it, bowl of oatmeal, honey on it, and then did the protocol, and then suddenly they said, guys, it didn't work. Well, you have to have an empty stomach. So you have an empty stomach going in for a morning workout. You have to start off with glucose. So here is let's get, here's a gel pack. And what you want to do is you want to have a 1-to-1 ratio of glucose to ketones. So the ketone serving sizes that we're doing are 30 grams. But what we found is the maximum, if you really want to push it to the maximum, it is about 60 grams for a 175-pound athlete. So if you're less or more than that, it's 1-to-1 ratio more than that. So if you weigh 50% more, then you need 50% more ester. So you have to find out the exact amount of ketone ester, the active ingredient, not necessarily with or without water. And then you want to match it on a 1-to-1 basis with the amount of carbs that are in here. When I say carbs, I'm not saying look at the sugar content that says 6. I'm saying look at the carbs that say 23 in this one. So let's say you're taking 60 grams of ester. You would want to take a little bit less than 3 packets of this. So you go from an empty stomach, you down 3 packets of this. You don't do food. It's not as accurate if you do food because then it's more of a slow release. You want a fast release. It can be this. It can be, uh, an orange juice drink, something that has glucose, but not something that has, requires you to drink like a liter of water. So a fast acting, compact amount. So you'll take that first, and then 20 minutes later, during that time, don't be running, don't be working out. You can be stretching, walking around, that's fine, but just don't be exerting that energy. We expect your glucose to go up. And then you'll take the ketone ester immediately. 20 minutes later, you'll take the ketone ester. And how you drink this, just real quick, it's on the website. Chill it first, chug it all, try and drink the entire amount or the entire amount that you've measured out all at once, and then immediately chase it with some sort of sparkling water. So have the sparkling water ready right here, chug it, and then immediately just a couple sips, not even that much. What you don't want is to have the sparkling water across the room, not opened yet, and waiting 2 seconds. The moment the air hits is when you get that bad aftertaste. So you really want to chug it and then just a couple small sips. Now not plain water. It can be flavored sparkling water or a diet soda, but um, not plain water, not coffee, not chewing gum. People have tried each one of those and they said, oh, now I understand. I really wish I had followed your directions. So you chug the ester, and then 10 minutes later is when you can start your warm up. You need to start a warm up where you're jogging for 15 to 20 minutes. We found that people, um, their gears are changing, their performance is actually worse for a good 15 or 20 minutes, and then it kicks in, and then that's when they have the dual fuel, working simultaneously. So you don't want to take it 10 minutes before a race unless that race is really long and you're uh, eh, by the way, this drink can only last about 90 minutes to 2 hours, so you've got to watch out for what long is. If you're okay with the beginning of your race being not so great, then you might be able to do that. But when I say race, I mean practice. You want to try it on practice first. You don't want to go straight into race day. So after 10 minutes, you start warming up and then it kicks in. Make sure you have some quantifiable measurements. You've got your heart rate, you've got your actual pace. Do not do it based on perceived effort. That won't work because what happens is your perceived effort changes. So you're able to run faster because you feel different. Some people that just normally run anywhere from 7 to 10 minute miles, they said, "Oh, it didn't do anything for me. I didn't feel anything different." Well, did you track it? It's like, no, I just go based on my feel. So that won't work. You want some quantifiable measures. The ideal way to test this is something that's 1 hour to an hour and a half. People find that it runs out right at the 1 hour and 45 minute mark. If you want something longer, it's still very early in the science. We're still trying to figure out how to do what's called a top off, where you take another amount preemptively before you crash at the hour 45. That's a little bit tougher. One thing that has worked is you take half the amount of ketones, but then instead of 20 minutes before taking the glucose, it's more like 10. I think we might even find that 5 works better because you're using the glucose. You don't want to be waiting 20 minutes because then you'll skyrocket and you might have an insulin spike. So you want to have them closer together and half the amount, not the entire 60 grams, but more like 30, maybe 40 you can try. And that'd be good for like that final climb in that last part of the race. As far as multi-hour, 7 hours, we haven't tested whether that's repeatable, whether you can do that every hour or not. We haven't tested that out. Someone will have to test that out. Um, there is one blog post from a ketogenic athlete that was able to sustain really high ketone levels from one drink up front for 7 hours, but that's just one case. So now it is the other things. Coffee is, if you normally drink coffee, caffeine, that's fine. Just make sure that it's sugar-free, no cream, no oil, no MCT, no bulletproof coffee. You don't want that mixing up with the ketones. So just straight black coffee. So then it's now minute 8. So now I'm going to talk about the ketogenic athletes. The protocol for them is a little bit different. Actually, before we go into that, there are some scenarios where if it's a sprinting event, you don't want to be taking the ketones and the glucose right before the sprinting event. So like a 40, 50-minute cycling all-out event, you want to move everything a half an hour earlier so it's in your system so you don't have any GI problems. One person had a GI problem and then he said, well, if I had taken 2 packets of glucose right before my race, I would have, that would have set me off. I said, well, I wish you would have told me that. So we move everything back for those hard workouts. And one incident we also had with someone was that they were working, their warm up was above their threshold, and they were burning up not the warm up. They were actually burning up a lot of the drink in the warm up, so they weren't counting that in their calculation of it lasting 90 minutes to 2 hours. So you have to take account for that. So back to the 9-minute mark, ketogenic athletes. This was designed and tested on non-ketogenic athletes. However, we have tested it a few times on some weightlifters that were fully fat adapted ketogenic. And what we found was that it did work for the weightlifters. And what they did was they first tried it with 30 to see how it worked. They said that the workout was great. I don't know if it was necessarily quantifiable or having PRs, but when they took the 60 grams, and that 60 grams was for 200-pound athletes, so you actually take 10 to 20% less than the non-keto people. So you take more like 50 grams for a 175-pound athlete as opposed to 60. There is diminishing returns. So he had multiple performance, quantifiable performance records. So the fully ketogenic athletes that are, we're talking over 1 year, maybe even 18 months, fully fat adapted, multiple fasting days, and your system is in deep, deep fat adaptation, not just pricking your finger and getting 1.0 for a few weeks. We're talking about deep, deep fat adapted. Your body is able to make basically glucose from your glycogen reserves, which is a whole new concept. Overnight, you're making it, and actually during the performance, you're able to tap into that as well. So we have had some success there. Where it gets really tricky is this middle of the road, somewhat ketogenic people. They don't like the idea of taking glucose. They're like, no, glucose is evil, uh, and it oftentimes does not work for them because they're glucose tanks. They don't have that super fat adapted glycogen system going. So we've had, more often than not failures on just taking ketones for these middle people. Where we have had success is them taking less glucose. So if you want to knock it out of the park, do the regular protocol, non-ketogenic protocol, which is 1 part glucose, 20 minutes later, 1 part ester. But taking it half of the glucose is what many of the keto people have done. Like they didn't want to take the 3 packs, so they took 1.5 and told me about it later, and it still worked. We were lucky. So you could try that. You could try half the amount of glucose, or try it the right way and then slowly build in. You don't want to be taking. We don't know yet, but I would hesitate taking any of the UCAN product because that's a slow release, and that's not what we want right now. Right now we want a spike, and then we want your ketones to bring that glucose back down. Eventually, we might find that half and half works, or the UCAN works better because you can have a slow release of the glucose. It might be great, but we haven't tested that yet. Um, Other tweaks, we have had one person that tried sipping on the drink along a 1 hour ride, and they had some benefits. But one problem is that it tastes pretty bad, so that makes it really tough. Uh, so that's pretty much it. Hopefully, it's not too confusing, but as we get more and more, we'll be able to find an easier and easier, predictable, repeatable protocols. But for right now, we really want to stick with exactly what works in the different types of athletes. One last thing, another way to test it is for mental performance, which is a completely different protocol. So I'll do a different video for that. All right.